Hello, everybody. I'm Libertarian Frank Harris,
And I'm Republican candidate Geoff Young.
and we're both going to be running for Congress. Jeff's running right now in the primaries as a Republican.
Right. And the election date is May 19th. And my main opponent is Andy Barr. There's another Republican running too.
And then I'll be seeking the nomination as a Libertarian in February at our 6th District Convention. So today, what are we going to be talking about, Jeff?
Well, I think we're going to talk about some history of the Middle East and how it relates to current events.
And foreign policy in general.
Right.
And then later on, we're going to be talking about the Second Amendment and gun policy.
Right.
And was there a third topic that we wanted to talk about?
I think that was it for today.
Okay. So two big juicy topics, and I can tell you on Facebook some of my anti-war rhetoric. I use the word rhetoric, but it's what I believe. Has not been received well by people. People only know what's happened recently, and what it reminds me of is how in basketball or football, quite often, when one player commits a foul and then the other player retaliates, well, the referee didn't see the first foul, and then they call the penalty on the guy who retaliates, and they don't see what the full context of what went on. And so what I believe we're seeing with a lot of the anger is people do not understand the history of what the U.S. involvement has been in the Middle East. Would you agree with that? Or
Yes, and I blame the media corporations for a lot of that.
Well, and when we talk about media corporations, what we have to acknowledge is that the media is owned by a lot of the same companies that build machinery for the war efforts.
Right.
So they have a vested interest in promoting war.
Right. And people and companies like that decades ago used to be called war profiteers. And it was a very dishonorable term.
Now, in general, you know more about this than I do. The companies I know that own some of these media companies are like Westinghouse.
Right.
And who is it that owns NBC? Is it Westinghouse?
I don't know. There's General Electric is involved.
General Electric, yeah. That's maybe who I'm thinking of. And what about KBR? What's I forget what KBR.
Kellogg, Brown and Root.
Kellogg, Brown and Root. Now, do they own some of the media too?
I don't know again.
I don't know
But
either.
I do know that the CIA itself has a major investment in the Washington Post. They have a contract with
Wow.
Jeff Bezos for something like $500 million.
In advertising?
No, in services, data management services.
Explain that, how that works.
I wish I knew.
So what the Washington Post has a vested interest in doing whatever the CIA wants them to do.
There you go. That's right.
All right. So here's what I believe, and it's a long history that what I know of it goes back to 1953, and so we've been involved in the Middle East ever since the end of World War II,
Right.
because we saw the need to control the supply of oil. So the United States corporate interest actually used the U.S. government and their military to push out British petroleum out of the Middle East.
Right.
The British petroleum people wanted to be in the Middle East, and what did we do to our special friends, the British? We pushed them out.
Right. Right. We said, yeah, you can run your oil company somewhere else.
And so that goes back a long way. I don't know when that particular series of events transpired, but that was the start. When we, at the end of World War II, we saw the need to control the supply of oil. And so we got involved in the Middle East in a big way. The CIA's been operating over there. Our military's been operating over there. We've got military bases all around the world, but especially in the Middle East. We have toppled duly elected leaders in the Middle East. We've been waging war on the Middle East anytime anybody opposed our interests.
Basically correct. That's right. And for a long time, it was the Soviet Union that was putting up some resistance, allying with governments like Egypt and Syria, or not allying, but supporting them and helping them defend themselves. You know, the Soviet Union and Russia now, since 1991, they've been interested in exporting weapons. You know, they're not entirely blameless in this whole
No,
world situation.
they've been trying to get control over there too, as is China. China's been operating over there more openly, and in Africa, to try to establish relations with the governments of these countries over there, and in some cases they, promise things like water. What's the word? Water treatment plants and things like that to help the people. Sometimes they deliver and sometimes they don't, from what I've been able to gather.
Well, I think the key point there is that it's economic relations, and that the United States, I would say, the only country that has a military empire today, a worldwide military empire. It's military.
Right.
It's military and intelligence, CIA, subversion. Not primarily economic, because we don't need all that. We don't need all the oil that is extracted in the Middle East. We have our own supplies, and we have access to energy efficiency and solar energy anyway. So it's not that we need the oil to survive. It's a matter, as you said, of controlling the oil. Yeah. I think that's accurate.
And see, in recent times, we've been using new technology to extract more oil out of the ground in our own country, things like fracking. But everything I've read about fracking suggests that it's a very short-term stopgap measure, and it's basically getting the last dregs of the oil out of the rock that they can get. And once they do that, there's nothing else we can do. It's gone. We usually, when we open up a new oil field, we get the easy to access oil, which is the first 50% that comes out of the ground, and then fracking gets the last 20 to 40% out. And then there's still 10 or 20% left in the ground, but it's nearly impossible to squeeze out. It takes as much energy to get out as what you get from it. So in my opinion, based on what I've read and what financial analysts have, the ones I trust have said, is that it's going to be a very short-term stopgap measure.
So continuing with your history, 1953, the United States, the CIA, managed to get an overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, a democratically elected president of Iran, or prime minister.
And they installed the Shah.
Right, who was basically a dictator.
But he was a friendly to the U.S. dictator.
Right.
So that's okay.
Right. And his reign was marked by torture, by assistance from the CIA in setting up secret police force, SAVAK. And
I remember that
the Shah was a modernizer in terms of the economy, but a totalitarian dictator.
He was more secular in nature.
Secular, not religious. And in 1979, he was overthrown by
the people under
a religious revolution.
Yeah. A segment of the population, not the entire population.
Ayatollah Khomeini.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had a revolution there in Iran, and ever since 1979, the United States has been doing whatever we could to change that regime, to undo the revolution, and to return it to a U.S. client state or a puppet government like the Shah. Now, the United States military involvement in the Middle East, I would say, dates from 1967, the Six-Day War. Before that, the allies of Israel were mainly France, and then when when Israel won the Six-Day War, the United States just jumped in and said, "Well, we're going to make Israel a client state, our unsinkable battleship in the Middle East," and it's been that way ever since.
And so we've used a variety of excuses over the last 20 to 30 years to topple different dictators like Saddam Hussein. Prior to toppling Saddam Hussein, we actually supplied Saddam Hussein with chemical weapons, which he used against the Iranians
Right.
and against his own people.
Well, against the Kurds and Iranians mainly.
So here we were backing Saddam Hussein
Yeah.
when he was our bad boy, but then when it became inconvenient, then we overthrew him.
Oh, yeah. Basically invaded his country,
Invaded.
conquered Iraq.
Yeah.
The weapons of mass destruction thing was just an excuse.
It was an excuse. They did find some weapons there, but not anything that was a threat to us.
Right.
I mean, they weren't missiles and things like that. It was more chemical weapons that they had buried in the ground and to hide them there. And they weren't going to be used against us. And so we essentially destabilized that region. And, the people that were in opposition to the invasion of Iraq predicted that with the fall of Saddam, that there would be a power vacuum there. And that's exactly what's happened. And who's the biggest player in that region? Iran. So
Yeah, right.
we did Iran a big favor by removing Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
And,
That was predictable, and it was predicted by many people, including Noam Chomsky,
yeah.
former professor of mine at MIT.
And so, a lot of conservatives predicted the same thing. Ron Paul predicted that.
Yes.
Libertarians predicted that.
Right.
It was easy to see coming. And so what people, which this boggles my mind, seem to forget is all the lies that we were told and the war drums that were beating well before 9/11 happened. Mm-hmm. I told my wife the day of 9/11 that it didn't matter who did this. They were going to use this as an excuse to invade Iraq.
Wow.
And that's exactly what happened. It didn't matter who did it. And so as it turned,
9/11, I was afraid of something like that too. I wasn't as specific as you were.
yeah, I mean, it was easy to see the war drums. The war drums had been beating for 2 or 3 years. You heard on the news every day about the no-fly zones and how the Iraqis were violating the no-fly zones. Mm-hmm. And so basically, we were shooting down their planes until we got rid of all the Iraqi Air Force. Mm. And then it became safe for us to invade.
Uh-huh.
And it was, just an excuse to shoot down and destroy the Iraqi Air Force.
So do you want to fast forward to today, or should we?
I'm trying to think if there's any other big things that we need to cover. Well, you can throw in Gaddafi. And,
Okay.
What many libertarians believe is that Gaddafi was assassinated, one, because he was a very strong leader in that region. He was trying to rally the troops over there. And by the troops, I mean he was trying to rally the other leaders of the Middle Eastern countries.
And Africa.
To stand, and Africa. Yeah, that's right. That's right, because they were kind of at a crossroads there, weren't they? Mm-hmm. And so he was trying to say, why do we put up with this kind of treatment from the United States? He was trying to rally the troops, and the troops were too afraid to stand up. So he wanted a gold-backed currency, and that's why we, took him out. We labeled him as a crazy leader, and we use that as an excuse to take him out.
Right. So you're talking about 2011.
Was it that recent?
Yeah, the Obama and Hillary Clinton, she was still Secretary of State at that time, arranged for NATO and the United States military to bomb Libya, and it created a failed state there.
We need to mention this important piece too. was it Madeleine Albright, secretary of the
Former Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, who famously, when asked how many people died as a result, this was in Iran, how many Iranians died because of sanctions put on Iran?
No, Iraq you're talking about.
No, I think this was Iran. Well, we can debate that later. Okay. But so we put sanctions on, I believe it was Iran. And she was asked, how many people do you think died from that? And they estimated 100 to 200,000 people, okay, including children. Yeah. And she famously was asked, was it worth it? And she said, yes, I think it was.
Okay. So
so they admit that. They admit that.
A few little details. I think it was Iraq. There were sanctions against Iraq ever since the Gulf War of 1991.
There were.
George Bush the first.
There were.
So Madeleine Albright was Secretary of State, or former Secretary of State. She was asked by a reporter, estimated that 500,000 children died as a result of our sanctions from 1991 till 2003. And the reporter asked, in your opinion, was it worth it? And she said, yes. Yes, it was worth it.
So this is why the Iranians don't particularly care for the United States. They see what we've done. We've been waging war against the people of the Middle East for over 20 years. Right. Effectively since the 1950s.
Right.
And we've been oppressing them, subjecting them, occupying their countries, occupying their territories, controlling their political systems. Yeah. And deposing duly elected leaders. So when something happens where, they fight back and attack our embassies, you have to ask, well, why did they attack our embassies? Well, these are the reasons why. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like we've been just beating the hell out of them for decades, mm-hmm. and killing literally hundreds of thousands. Estimates are, over 1 million people. And then every now and then they kill, they manage to kill a few of our people. Well, it's kind of like every now and then when a guy that beats his wife, every now and then she gets a punch in, mm-hmm. and to me that's just one punch, mm-hmm. Where we've been beating the hell out of them for decades.
I'd say that's accurate.
So I'm not anti-American. I love my country. I love my mm-hmm. country deeply. I don't like the U.S. foreign policy. I'm not a Christian, but I believe in God and I believe in morality. One of the things that libertarians are sworn when you become a libertarian to take the oath is the non-aggression principle. Mm. So what we believe in firmly, and people like Geoff, who's very anti-war, one of the true crusaders in the peace movement, what we believe is we don't believe in initiating force. Now, right. I don't know where Geoff stands on self-defense.
Yeah, self-defense.
Self-defense.
Using force in self-defense, I think, is justified.
Yeah, the so-called just war principle.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it might not even be the most effective defense, but it's morally and legally justified by international law. And but when our officials say Iran was attacking us in the Middle East, that leaves out the point that what are we why do we have forces in the Middle East?
Why do we have forces over there to begin with?
Right.
Hundreds of thousands of troops at various times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the number right now is lower, but over time it changes, fluctuates.
Let me pause right here so that we can break this video up into segments. Yeah. And this is part 1. Thank you.